Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific look, of course, at a single car from Gran Turismo Sport's lineup, and this time it's another car which was included in the game from day one. A very interesting new addition to a range of cars now, which was a duo before. Now it's a trio in effect, or at least as far as this game goes, but in the entire history of the Gran Turismo franchise, specifically though from Gran Turismo 5 onward, this vehicle has become kind of an important milestone, even though we didn't really realise it at the time. And the car is of course the GTbyCitroen, which is a supercar concept. It was available originally in two forms, which were the road version, the concept version. One was electric, one was presumably V8 powered, as the actual concept was, a Ford 5-litre V8, which I happen to think is one of the best sounding cars on YouTube if you look it up. Now then, it kind of evolved and mutated into a fan favourite race car, the Extreme GTbyCitroen LM, which is an incredible looking machine, but now of course that one is technically kind of still here, but it's a very different car in a number of ways to what it was before. In particular, of course, the price is massively different. And I'm going to peg that down as a good thing, because in Gran Turismo 5 and 6, it was a very expensive car. I believe in Gran Turismo 5 it might have been 10 million or something like that. In Gran Turismo 6 it was like 2.25 million, which is still way too much. It should have easily been 1 to 1.5. That would have made it perfectly rivaled against stuff like the Zonda Rs, potentially even stuff like the CLK LM from Mercedes. That kind of territory would have been good for it. 2.2 million, that's kind of ridiculous. That's even more than a Mazda 787B or a Mercedes Sauber C9, and it's not that quick. It's as simple as that. Now we are going to look at the Group 3 car, which is of course the newer version of that race car which GT Sport has, but this one is the newest, unique version of the range, because this is the Group 4. And of course, it suffers from potentially a similar issue to what something like the Veyron or the Ferrari 458 or pretty much any other exotic-based Group 4 car could have. And it's a problem which I believe, if I recall correctly, I alluded to in the Scirocco review in, of course, Group 4 as well, which the Scirocco does not suffer from, the Megane doesn't suffer from, and a couple of others don't either. And that is, if the vehicle in question, in any particular racing category, but Group 4 is this perfect example, if it started out lower than that class, then it has a pretty good chance of making a good race car. If, however, the car had to be detuned or heavily restricted to get it down to that level, so less power than stock, more weight than stock, well then the car has a bigger hurdle to get over, because you've basically neutralised some of its advantages. And in the case of something like a Veyron, arguably one of its biggest advantages is sheer power. So having the Group 4 version have nowhere near that kind of power means that you've got to make up for that with lower weight and good handling. And that is a similar occasion with this Citroen. Now thankfully it's not quite as powerful as the Veyron to begin with, so the drop isn't as drastic, but still it now has under 400 horsepower compared to, what is it on the regular versions, like 580, something like that. So it's not a massive drop, but it's a drop nonetheless. Thankfully though, the fact that it weighs less than a GT3 car did in Gran Turismo 6 means it's still pretty well placed. 1300 kilos isn't that bad, and even if you don't upgrade the power and drop the weight, it's still got over 300 horsepower per tonne, which is decent sports car territory, high-end hot hatch territory, generally tuned hot hatch territory. So again, it's pretty well placed, at least on paper, against stuff like the Meganes and the Scirocco's, which could appear to have the disadvantage based on their appearance, and in road-going circumstances they would, because they're just not the same level of car. But with the levelling and equalling effect of Group 3 and Group 4, that means that by definition the playing field is brought to a much similar degree. So obviously you want the cars to all be competitive enough to win, but some are still going to be better than others. Now the Scirocco and the Megane are known for being OP. I haven't heard as many, if any, people say that the Veyron and this Citroen are, but that's not necessarily surprising, for the reasons that I said. Now with the Veyron, I mentioned in that review how amazingly good it was because of how much you could drop the weight. It felt literally far better than the Veyron ever has before, and probably better than it ever will, unless they make some kind of GT1 version in the game. However, This one I would say doesn't see as much of a jump, and I think that's the benefit of the Veyron being so cumbersome to begin with. You can see a huge difference for your effort and for your work, whereas the Citroen was okay to begin with and now it's just good. It's not outstanding, it's good. It feels like a more supercar shaped touring car in effect, which makes sense because that's kind of what Group 4 cars are. They're reminiscent of GT24 cars, BTCC machines, some lower level, say, touring car-esque vehicles, so that's not a surprise at all. However, if you're looking to go for the more extreme choice, the more kind of bombastic choice in the Group 4 class, then of course the Veyron and the Citroen are going to appeal, and for me personally they definitely do as well. The Veyron is probably still my favourite Group 4 car, but I must admit it's primarily due to the weight. And not so much that the weight is lower than everything else, because of course it's not, but just that it's a Veyron and it's that light is just inherently cool to me. With this one it's not quite that shockingly cool, but it's a good car, it's a dependable one. The handling is on the heavy side, which is quite easy to work with. You can loosen it up, lower the camber for instance, adjust the diff, maybe lower the downforce a little bit depending on the track, so it gives you a lot to work with. And the reason why, going back to the start of the video, that I said this car was kind of more important than we might think is because, just like with the Veyron, the longer you spend with a vehicle, the less you tend to appreciate it, unless it manages to stay relevant. The Veyron hasn't managed to stay relevant as much because of all the cars being even faster than it was. However, in the case of the Citroen, the reason why it's so relevant, in particular to the world of Gran Turismo, is because in effect, although we didn't realise it at the time, it was one of the very first Vision GT type vehicles. And although a lot of people don't like those now, I don't hear many of those people complaining about the Citroen, because it almost feels different even though it's basically the exact same thing. A car that was designed specifically for a game and then had real world implications afterward, as very much so an afterthought. So from that point of view, although you could argue, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, that the Nike car from Gran Turismo 4 was technically the first time that we saw that happen, sort of, I would say that it's the Citroen which follows more the kind of form and pattern of VGTs that we've come to expect since then. It has that kind of design, and it's a car design that's actually aged really well. It's around, what, a decade old now, if not more, so that's pretty impressive for a car to still look futuristic a decade on. There aren't that many designs which can still do that, especially in the supercar world. It tends to age very quickly, but it's a very cool one. It's a great Group 4 race car as well, and it doesn't feel anywhere near as stunted as it easily could. So they've done a good job with this one. It feels good for the class, and although it's not necessarily OP, it is definitely worth a look. But that's it for this pick overall, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.